Great, there we go. Thanks to you both for making the time. As I was saying to Nick, that my goals here are kind of threefold. One, to bring myself, make sure I'm up to speed completely on the context of this issue in this discussion. Two, to kind of sync with you both about your own interest in it, your own priorities, your own history with it. It seems like it fits really well in the overlap of our interests. And see if there's still any, enthusiasm or interest in moving it forward. And three, really to get Nick's perspective as I was saying in the Venn diagram of Nick's interests with contributor success at GitLab and Drupal, upstream features. This seems to be sort of like right in the center of that diagram. So I wanted to kind of start that discussion and talk it through a little bit with you. I feel like I'm up to speed, having read the discussion and read some of the materials, but I'll summarize what I see from my perspective, and then you all can kind of help me fill in. But it seems like what we have here is a really interesting proposal to create and integrate into GitLab some contributor recognition mechanisms that are modeled after mechanisms that the Drupal crew has created for their community. The idea being, wouldn't it be great if contribution mechanisms were already baked into GitLab so that we didn't, communities didn't need their own sort of bespoke tooling to understand how contributions are attributed, to whom they are attributed, and to be able to collect some basic metrics on, contributions from certain parties, or I should say the origins of certain contributions to their project, so they can perform better outreach, so they can perform a better recognition of those contributors, so they can reach out to contributors and get their impressions and feedback of their community experience and help them understand their needs and potential roadmap impacts, all things like that. So the idea here is that we build some of that tooling into GitLab itself, so that contributor recognition and contributor attribution is a part of the merge request experience from the start, which I think personally is a really exciting prospect. And clearly there's a need for it from an open source perspective and from a project perspective. But it seemed to me that what I was seeing in the discussion was that we still needed to work on the business case for such a feature. Because while it's beneficial to upstream communities, for something to get adopted into GitLab, the product, we need to have a strong business case for it, which I certainly understand. So I wanted to kind of get your impressions of where that conversation stands, whether and how you think we might be able to move this forward, and what are options, what they may be. Maybe just half brainstorming, half catch Brian up, half, let's strategize a little bit. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And maybe if it's okay, I'll just dive right in if I may. So I think since I started here at GitLab, a lot of conversations regarding contributions in general. If the piano disturbs, by the way, I'll move to another place. I don't know if it's okay. What I understood is today, so we measure at GitLab merge requests based by the author, and a lot of the KPIs or the OKRs are based on these kind of data points. There's a couple of reasons apparently that is the case. One, and that's I think the main reason for this conversation, is that today that's the only thing we can measure. And then there's a couple of solutions or a couple of questions that are raised. One, what would need to change for us or for GitLab to look at contributions in a broader perspective? So that's okay. You can think non-code contributions, code contributions, code reviews. There's a couple of things that I discussed in length in certain presentations and what those roles are. But then if we go back to the values of GitLab itself, if we cannot measure that, it doesn't really exist. And then it brings us into a chicken and an egg problem, like what to do first. Should we try to measure this maybe in a boring way? Can we go to this solution and also help other communities? And I think this proposal hits right in the middle of what we need to start measuring that data, to then maybe see what kind of contributions are being added to GitLab as a whole. Secondary, we have a lot of conversations about going from volunteer contributions to paid contributions. I think also you, Brian, and Christos are involved in some of these conversations. If we don't know, based on data, if a person is being sponsored to do the contribution or is basically a volunteer to do a contribution, we will also not be able to measure the impact of the healthiness towards the GitLab contribution system. And so this measurement system will help on those two fronts. Something that I want to share, maybe that's also for the recording in a comment or something, that's a blog post of Dries Buitaert that did analysis on the data from the credit system on Drupal.org to understand how much of the contribution is being paid, what are the verticals that are doing the contributions, like all of these things you can pull from that data and then act on that data. So I think that's totally in line with how GitLab sees how we should act and how we should measure data first, all of those principles. Hopefully that helps, or I don't know that I said anything new.
Helps a lot. Yeah, helps a lot. Just again, I'm just trying to collect as much context and history as I can, and kind of think through it all with you. Christos, anything to add? I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you're not fully up to snuff, but if you have anything to add, we're happy to hear it.
No, I think the three of us are perfectly aligned in what we consider a priority, and that we all want this to be developed because we think that it's useful and it's going to help us capture more information. And also it's most probably going to help us start capturing additional other traditional code contributions. We might use it otherwise as well. In terms of background and some conversations that we've been having in the past months, right before Nurit left, in regards to the status of it. So there is the interest, and we started with Nurit, we started exploring two possible avenues. One is the avenue of GitLab developing it, and I think this is the direction that Kai is going towards, asking for, making a business case for us to explore, doing some research to see whether it's going to be valuable for our product. But also there is the other avenue. Since this feature is getting a lot of traction from the open source community, there was the avenue that we started exploring of having community developing this feature, which is also it has some risks as well, because when someone opens a merge request at GitLab, it's up to the reviewers to whether accept or reject the feature request, the MR. But again, if we get the right, let's say, support, we can go through the avenue and trying to find other resources in case something, because there was also the conversation of resources and prioritization. So there are two avenues we can explore here. We can do both, but there are always options in order to for developing that. You can find, it's useful for Drupal, it's useful for Fedora, it's useful for other people. We can work in the open and trying to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that framing. That helps a lot, and it mirrors somewhat, and it crystallizes somewhat what I'm reading in the issue. Just to summarize what I'm sensing, to paraphrase Christos so I understand, we've got two potential development pathways for a feature like this. One is sort of the corporate pathway, and that pathway, the benefits are something like, we have maybe a more reliable, pipeline, labor pipeline, because we, can funnel it through our usual development, usual development organization or engineering organization. What that involves is sort of a more robust business case document that I saw folks working on. I think Christos and Nuritsi had been working on it. I looked at it, they called it a canvas or something like that. I was reading through that, and it involves sort of, making the business case for what type of user uses this feature, why it's beneficial, how it enhances the value of the platform, all the things you would expect, nothing that I wouldn't expect or that seemed absurd, from a product prioritization standpoint. It makes sense to me. So that's the work we would have to do to go in that direction. The other option, the community one, it seems to me that, I'm reading here in the comments where Kai is saying, like, if we got a merge request that met the GitLab's definition of done, and the feature was robust and sound and was capable of integrating and worked and met all the criteria, it would be merged, right? It would be, I'm seeing 9 months ago, he's saying, like, Maritzi said, to be direct, if a community contributor creates an MR for this feature and it meets the definition of done, would it be accepted? Or somebody said that. Kai said, yes, it would. So it seems like if we already have like a clear sense of the community need and the justification and the interest on the community side, we can catalyze. The benefit is that we don't necessarily have to do all the product prioritization documentation, although I'm sure we should do that. But we don't necessarily get to channel the work through the GitLab engineering pipeline. We channel it through community development pipelines, right? So I guess my question.
Yeah, the difficulty I think there is, and I spoke
okay,
to Tim regarding this, is that the knowledge domain from, for example, the Drupal community is in PHP. Right. The knowledge domain that is necessary here is Ruby. And I asked, like, why didn't you create like an initial merge request? And I think they either need help or guidance, or indeed like to figure out, is there like a way to create a bot or anything like that is not directly the most difficult case to integrate it into the product itself, just to get things going. And maybe that's also like the middle way that we need to help them with, like, what is the MVP version of this solution that is simple, boring, but still effective and solves both the Drupal's case and the GitLab's case. I was like, what's the minimum to do there? Right. I think that might need some more ideation, and maybe that's also what Kai is asking. Like, let's find that initial business case. Maybe let's find that sweet spot. To me, I think the initial sweet spot is to stay with the MRs in the beginning and just look at who is collaborating on those MRs instead of just looking at the author. Start to gather all the data from who is collaborating on that MR towards the finish, and see if we can somehow put that into either the data point within GitLab itself. Is it within the CRM? Is it an external system? That's something that I don't know yet, but that's going towards solutions, and maybe that's not up for debate right now. No,
I don't know. I mean, I think that's the question, right? To me, that's the question. What's our MVC for something like this? It's just, for me, the question is, what's our path for getting to that MVC, right? Is it, obviously it's something in between, right? It's not all community development or all GitLab development. That dial is somewhere in between, or maybe, but I think it's tilted in one direction more than the other. And so I'm trying to understand how the choice of development direction or development source influences our next steps, right? Because it seems to me that we take different first steps here together if we choose one direction over the other.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a little bit dependent on how fast we'd like to go. The contributor success team just got started, and we are recruiting for roles in that team. If that team is up to speed and there is some capacity in leftover towards building features, this feature basically, that's a sweet spot as well for contributor success. If we want contributors of GitLab, both paid and unpaid, to be recognized, we need a system. This system seems to be the right system. But it might take some time before those people are onboarded and are being active on working on such a system. And then it's the question, how fast do we want to go? I also know that the Drupal Association is working on a prototype for the system, because their need is really high as they are in active migration to GitLab. And I think that's a collaboration that we need to have, is like, what's that crossing point?
They're developing something that in Ruby that would be a viable merge request for GitLab eventually, is what you're saying?
from what I understood, and yeah, I could be very wrong, but I'm in the GitLab channel of the Drupal Slack, and Tim wrote in the 1st of June, so that's 2 weeks ago, that they began prototyping the credit entity that will be the Drupal.org entity. So that's in Drupal.org in PHP land, that consumes credit data that might come from a GitLab bot or maybe the GitLab CRM, but that's something that they're still looking into.
Okay. All right. That's great. I know we're running low on time, but I had some budget stuff I wanted to talk about. So for the sake of the recording, I'm going to pause the recording here, talk about some more sensitive GitLab stuff, but hopefully this recording was helpful to other folks interested in this. Feel free to reach out to anybody on the call here if you want to discuss it more. Obviously there's a huge interest in this, and we'll be glad to partner.